available for later if anybody needs it. So welcome everyone to this evening's event, our fireside chat for EdD students, focused on the book that I wrote with my colleagues, Understanding Improvement Science Dissertations, a guide for faculty, committee members, and students. My hope for us tonight is to do a little bit of an overview of the book, just kind of walk you through. For those of you who have it or don't have it, it should be useful. And then to really answer your questions. So we have about 90 minutes together. I want to poke back here for a minute. There's something I forgot to mention on my opening slide. This quote here is one that was said years ago to me at a meeting in Chicago, where a man from the University of Edinburgh, whose name has just suddenly escaped me. Oh, that's horrible. But he couldn't understand why we Americans couldn't figure out the difference between an EdD and a PhD. And he just said it so plainly: a PhD is to understand the world, and an EdD is to change it. And that resonates with me because it really is the bulk of what improvement science is meant to be, which is one of the reasons I advocate for it in EdD programs. So hold on to that, because that is the goal of the work that you are doing, is to make change in your institutions, in the field of education, in the work that you do every day. So like I said, we are going to, I'm going to give you an overview of the book, and then just open it up for questions, because I really want to hear from you all and see how useful the book's been, as well as what more you still need to know. And at the end, I also plan to point out some additional resources that might be useful in the work that you all are going to do. I can see the chat, so if there's any questions that come along, feel free to jump in and ask those questions. All right, so you'll see this visuals in the book, and it really is what my co-authors and I saw as the journey through an improvement science dissertation, which is a little bit different than just a journey through regular improvement science if you were using improvement science in your job without having to write a dissertation. We really wanted to focus on why is this different for a dissertation? What are the components that you need to think about? What needs to go into that? And so we put this together, and we saw it as this journey for what we call scholarly practitioners. And I'll give you a definition of that in a moment. But what I want to point out here as we're walking through this journey is that improvement science is really about, it's about changing systems. So we're looking to a much broader view than just changing what might be right in front of you, but thinking about those problems that you're looking at and how you might go about changing systems. And I see a great question on here from one of your colleagues to me directly. It says, is it possible to change the world without understanding it? No, I don't think so. I think EdDs definitely understand it, and that's part of improvement science, is understanding both the problems and the systems that generate those problems, but you understand them from a very different way. PhDs work to generate knowledge that is broadly used in understanding the world, but EdDs really learn how to take that knowledge and understanding and apply it for change. So thinking about systems as you go into this work is really important, because often students miss that point, that improvement science is about a big giant system, and your dissertation and practice is going to be a small piece of changing that system. And I'll show you some graphics for that later on as we think about it. Quickly, what is improvement science, the what and the why? It is a methodological approach similar to other methodologies that are out there, like case study, ethnography, those kinds of things. It's very practical, though, applied. It's also very based in science. It comes out of the field of business originally in the 1940s with Edward Deming's work. It was more recently, in the last 20 or so years, adopted into healthcare through the Institute for Healthcare Improvement, and is now used widely in healthcare and is taught as a regular course in most healthcare programs. And then in the last 10 years or so, it's been adopted by the Carnegie Foundation, which saw a need to bring that kind of systems thinking and rapid learning through change ideas into the field of education. So they have promulgated it as a way to think about changing educational systems in our country, as opposed to focusing on randomized trials or the sort of silver bullet approach to fixing issues. And from there, because my organization, the Carnegie Project on the Education Doctorate, has stemmed from, we are a child branch of the Carnegie Foundation, we started to see how this might resonate really well with students who are working on their EDDs. Similar to action research, but again, it focuses on systems. It is a disciplined inquiry. It uses all the same methodological tools and practices that other traditional methodologies use, but they are meant to solve problems in a quick fashion. They focus on what we call high leverage problems. Those are problems that aren't necessarily those that are so localized that they can't really be understood outside of an organization. They are those that are related to big issues like dropout rates or suspension rates, but then can be looked at closely. So by understanding what happens in individual organizations around those problems, if we gather kind of a grassroots understanding, we have an opportunity to impact how we think about and change those problems on a broader scale. And they focus also on the system. So it's not just one person's view of what that problem looks like in their own workspace. It's how the whole system within which they work contributes to perpetuating that problem. The other unique thing about it is that it provides tools. It has these tools that you can use, everything from fishbone diagrams to systems mapping, things that help you understand the problem and then go about improving it through the use of driver diagrams and PDSA cycles. So these very hands-on tools that once you've graduated and no longer are working on your dissertation, you can still use those in practice. And that's really the goal, that we're teaching you how to use this as a means of changing your practice and the way you go about doing your practice once you've graduated. Some other quick definitions I want to run by are from the Carnegie Project, and they are how we think about EdD programs. So we focus on the right-hand side here, the scholarly practitioner. That is the person who we aim to graduate from EdD programs, that they have the ability to name and frame and solve the problems in practice through those hands-on skills like improvement science, that they use both research and practical knowledge as applied tools for change, that they know the importance of equity and social justice in the work that they do as they strive for change, and that their work gets disseminated in multiple ways, not just through a dissertation, but potentially through presentations to boards, through executive summaries, through parent conferences, through multiple audiences. And that work that they do is often done in collaboration with those same stakeholders that are either in the university, in the community, in their educational systems, but that they know they are not the only ones working on this problem, affected by or can impact that problem, and that wide stakeholder view is important. Most of our EdD member programs focus on the idea of a problem in practice, which is similar to a high leverage problem. It is a persistent, contextualized problem that is in the workplace of where the student is, and allows them to use that as sort of their laboratory that they work on throughout the program. They complete a dissertation in practice, which is a scholarly endeavor that impacts that complex problem of practice. And then they do that through what we call inquiry as practice, which is something different than traditional research methods in that it teaches how to take traditional research methods and applied methods such as improvement science and teaches you how to do that as a way of being. So it teaches you how to design innovative solutions to address those problems, but also how to use data to understand the effects of innovations and to be able to gather, organize, judge, analyze situations through that data. So it's a very different mindset than traditional doctoral programs. It is much more applied, and it's taking those tools of research, inquiry, literature, and learning how to use those as tools for change. So I wanted to give that background before I go forward and talk a little bit about the book and the dissertation in practice using improvement science. So among these steps that we mentioned, there is different places that you head as you're working towards your EdD. As a scholarly practitioner, you need to think about what is it you're aiming to improve with this work. You have to think about what kinds of changes might be reasonable to use. And then you have to think about how do you really know if that change has happened. And then once you have all that knowledge, what do you do next in your leadership role? What steps need to be taken to continuously improve and make things better? Part of that process a very important part of that process is defining what a problem is through a variety of different tools. How do you define what we call an actionable complex problem in practice? And by actionable, we mean something that you can actually do something about. And that comes from not only the tools and resources that are available to you, but your role in your organization and what your influence is over that problem. So thinking systems wide, depending on where you are in that system, how can you impact change on that problem? How can you impact the system? So we want you to be thinking at that level. That's done through a variety of different tools, but the important point here is that problems are not solutions. And oftentimes we see students come into programs with solutions to what they think is a problem. And they try and push that solution as opposed to really thinking deeply, where does that problem come from? And so, at least in my program, and I know other folks who use improvement science in their EdD programs have often said students are so fixated on solutions, how do we get them to focus more deeply on the problems? And I say, continually think about systems. This is a systems methodology. So if you think you know what the problem is, you need to fishbone it, one of the tools we see here. You need to do empathy interviews. You need to use existing data in your organization. You need to go to the literature and read more deeply about what's said about that problem and really understand the roots of where it comes from. So broaden your own scope. Don't come in with your narrow mind of what you've seen happen. That's not to say that your gut and all of your practitioner knowledge isn't important, but it's to help you get beyond your own thinking to see, okay, even if I were to solve this in the way that I want to solve it right now, am I really going to fix it for the long run, for changing the system? So all of these tools help you to see where the problem comes from. Oftentimes, empathy interviews are fantastic because it helps you see how other stakeholders view that problem. Fishbone diagramming with stakeholders is a terrific opportunity to also hear where people see where the roots are. A fishbone diagram is a root cause analysis process. What are the roots of the problem and what's causing it? Looking at existing data in your organizations that you have access to so you can see those kinds of trends that will help you say, okay, this is a bigger issue than what I thought it was, or this is more related to this department or that department. And then, of course, the literature is one of the biggest pieces of this work, going into that vast body of knowledge in your library and saying, okay, what do we already know about this problem? What do we know about it on a big scale that will help me understand what's happening in my local context? So the literature is incredibly important here, but it's used in a different way, which I'll talk about in a moment. But then also understanding the system that generates that problem and continues to perpetuate it. You have to take a broader step back and say, okay, let's do some systems or processing maps to understand what does this look like across the whole system. How would a user come into my organization, a student, a faculty member, a parent? How would they go about maneuvering the system to be able to get this problem solved? And that can kind of show you where weak links might be in the organization. You can do a force field analysis where you can see what parts of the organization are ready to see change happen and what parts are pushing back, and really determine what are you up against to create change. You can look at stakeholders through power interest grids to understand where are the stakeholders in the process of having change possible. But the idea is that you're combining that understanding of the system with the understanding of the problem so you can really situate what is it I'm capable of doing at this point, because now I understand what's going on. If you don't do all of that background work, chances are you're going to do very surface level change or may not even address the actual problem that you think you're addressing. So defining that problem is the first step in moving towards improvement in the solutions that you want to do. Part of that, as I said, is this idea of literature. Literature has a very different understanding in different doctoral programs, and it is a big part of doctoral work across all programs. There's a vast body of knowledge that has been created by both practitioners and academics that can be of so much use to students. And so thinking about what can I learn more from this? How can I expand my own thinking? How can I see what's been done, what hasn't been done, whose voices aren't being heard, who am I not thinking about? And so going into that literature and doing literature searches is very, very useful, but it's done differently than it is in traditional dissertations. It has a specific purpose to help you illuminate the idea, really bring into your own thinking about, what do I not know about this problem? How is it going to create a good context for me? How can I situate this problem in a way that I can say, okay, there's a strong basis for understanding this problem? You go through a process of looking at, what do you need to know? What do I need to know as a practitioner to be able to frame my understanding of this problem? The EdD program, which is an educational doctorate in leadership at Harvard, calls this process the review of knowledge for action. At my institution, the University of Pittsburgh, we call it a scholarly review of knowledge. And it's different. We've changed the language because we want to signify that it's different than a literature review that a PhD student does, where they go on for pages and pages looking for gaps in the literature or proving that they've mastered the literature for the work that they're going to do post-graduation. It is designed in a way for you to think about, what am I going to do with literature post-graduation? How am I going to use it to help me look at the next problem that comes along? So how has it been investigated in the past? What have people learned about it? What aspects of the problem have I may not thought about? What other questions are out there that people still have that might influence what I'm thinking about? So using that literature as a real tool to ground your work going forward. And it should help you organize those bodies of literature that help frame your understanding. We expect in many of these dissertations in practice that this section won't be large. It'll be much smaller than traditional dissertations. At my institution, I believe it's 15 pages, because we want to know that you just know enough to be able to frame your understanding of that problem. And it will also ground your problem in a stronger body of evidence. It'll give it real credibility when you're arguing for that problem to exist. So stepping back for a moment and thinking about defining that problem and defining your system, as you're writing that up, it's your job to persuade your reader that this really is a problem through that evidence, through the understanding of the literature, through the stakeholder analysis, through empathy interviews and fishboning. You really have to convince your audience, say it were to be your boss, that this is a problem in our organization that needs to be solved. And that's the main part of getting to where you want to go with solutions, is grounding and understanding those problems. And I stress this highly because it seems to be across all of our programs, whether they use improvement science or not, one of the greatest issues for students is to really understand deeply the problems. From there, the next step is to think about, what is your theory of improvement? What is it you are going to do to be able to think about fixing this problem? So now we get to talk about solutions, woohoo, which is what I know most students like. In the book, we designed an improvement science dissertation and practice model of improvement, which is based on the improvement science model of improvement, but it goes a little bit deeper just to focus on the role that practitioners have in leadership in creating change. So we ask the fundamental questions. What is the scholarly practitioner, that's you as a graduate or soon to be graduate, aim to improve? What are you aiming to improve in this work? What is the most reasonable change that you can do? And that is based on feasibility, on resources, on your impact or influence in your organization. Then how will you know as the scholarly practitioner if that change was actually an improvement? Quite frequently we do changes, but we don't gather enough data to say, did it really actually improve not only the problem, but the broader system? And then once we've done that, what are the next steps that we need to take, either to continue to work towards improving that, or to adjust and shift and say, okay, that initial change didn't do as much as we'd like. What's another change we might try? We combine that with what is known in traditional improvement science, a PDS, Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle. We renamed it to I think we called it I don't know that we actually said it out loud, a SIAR model, which means strategize, because that's more of something that a leader would do, strategize, implement that project or that change that you have, analyze those results of the data that you've gathered to see, and then really reflect. Did it work? Did it not work? What different steps do we need to take? Can we continue this way? Can we scale it up? Do we need to scale back? Was it a total failure? So we put this together really with the idea of thinking about the scholarly practitioner and the person who is going to be using this work in practice in a leadership role. From there, you start to think about what we call a driver diagram. And this is really where the change fits into the bigger system idea. And a driver diagram is the big picture. I like to tell my students that it's really the piece, it's really a roadmap for the work that you're going to do in your organization the next 2 to 5 years, maybe, because there's a lot of changes that need to happen, a lot of places within the system that need to be impacted for you to really reach your aim of the work that you want to do. So we look at this driver diagram and we see here that we have an aim where we ask, what is the scholarly practitioner aiming to do? I give an example from one of my students a couple of years ago who, there you go. He worked in the physician's assistance program at my university, and he was the director of the department, and he wanted to change the way students in the program rated their mentors, because their mentors are people who are not necessarily affiliated with the program formally, but they are practitioners in the field that their students would go and job shadow and work with for 6 months during clinical rotations. And those faculty, or not faculty, they called them mentors. Those mentors were not really great at giving feedback or supporting those students. And so he was trying to figure out, how can we make that part of our program much more effective for our students? So he drew out a driver diagram that started with his aim statement. And we read a driver diagram from the left to right. We start with our aim statement. What do we want to do? And aim statements are really meant to be very specific, because they need to be something that both you and people you're working with in your organizations can look at and understand, sort of as the goal for everybody. By January 2022, over 90% of the mentors in this program would be rated as agree or strongly agree by the students who went through the clinical rotation. So this was the goal he had about 2 years ago. He wanted to go through several cycles of change to get to that goal. As he then looked at his organization, at his theory, he was trying to say, where in the system might I be able to create change? So his system included both the mentor role and the student expectations. Those were places, main areas within the system that he knew he might be able to create some kind of change. Then the secondary drivers were smaller breakdowns of those. So what about mentor roles? Mentor competencies, as well as their effort and time. And he thought, okay, which one of those can I impact? Under student expectations, student roles, and student understanding, which one of those can I impact? And then that third column looks at the how. What can you do? So he came up with a couple of different ideas and decided for his dissertation and practice that he would do a training with the mentors. So he developed a bunch of different online modules that those trainers went through, and then they rated themselves in terms of their own competencies. And then eventually, when the students went through a rotation with them, he looked at the student evaluations of them. And so when we're doing the work, we then work backwards from right to left. We do the change, we see if the change has impacted the secondary driver. Did that change impact the primary driver? And did we get closer to our aim statement? So this is the big picture of what it all looks like, but it helps you to see the what you want to change, the where you might be able to change, and this is why systems are important, and then the how. So thinking about the work that you're doing, where in your system might you be able to create change? That's the driver diagram. Next, we think about a different aspect of the driver diagram, because we've asked, how do we know a change is an improvement? And there's different kinds of measures that we use. Now, originally improvement science came up with this word measures, which I think has confused a lot of students, simply because measures we often think of as data that we're gathering to show that the change happened. But there are what we call improvement science measures or improvement measures, which look at the system as a whole. And this is something that may not be immediately apparent in the dissertation that you do, but it is something you have to think about for the long term. There are different kinds of measures across your driver diagram that will help you understand if the change that you did was an improvement. We start with the process measure, which is over here on the right-hand side. The process measure is the immediate measure that happens when you create your change. So you put your change through your SIR cycle or your PDSA cycle, and then you get data after you gather the data and you analyze it and you say, okay, that had a positive effect. It seems to be working on the immediacy of what we did. Then we look at what we call leading outcome measures, which are down on the bottom of the change column. Those leading outcome measures help us to see, okay, our changes are positive and they're slowly pushing towards those drivers. We can see change happening and moving us in the right direction. So those are very small measures, both the process measure and the leading outcome measures, because they're very immediate in the change process that you do. The driver measures might be down the line after you've done a couple of change ideas where you'll see, are those drivers shifting? So in this example, are the mentor competencies changing? Are mentors showing more competence in the work that they're doing? Are their roles changing? Are they providing better feedback as they work with students? Are we starting to see that? So you can see how it's shifting those places within the system a little bit towards the final aim. And then a lagging outcome measure is the final outcome measure after you've completed all those change ideas and you've reached your 90%, and you can say, here we are, we've reached our aim. Now, all of that may not happen in your dissertation. Only that process measures or those leading outcome measures might change. So when you think about that, I have a lot of students who think they're going to do all of this with the dissertation. There just isn't enough time unless your program starts you doing SIR PDSA cycles in the first semester. But even then, it might be hard. Another measure that's really important, particularly as leaders in organization, is this idea up in the right-hand corner of a balance measure. So the kinds of changes that you're introducing, and as you're moving the system through the changes in the drivers, are you upsetting some other part of the organization? So if the change in this example is a training module, and if my student had to shift resources from, I don't know anything about physician's assistants programs enough to say, let's just say he had to take some financial resources from buying cadavers that they use in the program and move those to this training module. Then there's a whole section of the system that is now down in financial need because of this. So you shouldn't upset the whole system as a result of the work that you're doing. You should keep the system balanced. So it should either all improve or stay balanced, but you shouldn't be moving things in ways that it is really going to upset another part and cause bigger problems. Now, again, that is all for the bigger picture of improvement and the long-term work that you'll do as change agents, scholarly practitioners, improvers. But think about those as you're designing even for your dissertation and practice, because it's important to know, how is my change going to impact the rest of the system, and how will I know if that is actually happening? From there, the next part is the fun part, really. It's going out and doing your strategize, implement, analyze, and reflect, or PDSA cycle with traditional improvement science, to go and try out that change and do something, which is really the fun part, right? This is what you've been waiting for since you got into your program. So this is when you look at what is the most recent change that I can try? Oops, sorry about that. What is the most recent change that I can try? And how do I go about putting it into the framework? Strategizing, implementing, analyzing, and what I'm going to do next. We do that through a kind of template that we call a SIR template or a PDSA template. And this is where you map out what you're going to do. One of the unique things about improvement science is there are all these tools that let you map out your learning. And I have my student put all of them in the appendix because they are great tools to refer to and really see that work. But as you go off and are in your daily job and you're outside of your dissertation, these are still tools that can be used with teams. So this template helps you see what it is you were planning to do. What was the change idea that you were going to do? What's the goal that you want to reach with that change idea? And then you'll see in this space right here, this is where you have your inquiry questions. Now, most dissertations have research questions. And so your faculty may say, where are your research questions? We call them inquiry questions, again, because I believe that changing language is important when we want to think about the EdD as a professional doctorate. And we also want to think about you all as practitioners being people who use inquiry. So you have inquiry questions, and this is where you put those. You say, what is it you want to learn from the change that you're going to implement? So what are the primary questions that you're asking as you implement that change? But then you also map out, what are the predictions? What do you think is going to happen when you implement your change? And how are you going to know? What are the measures, and not the improvement measures, but the methods that you're going to use? So what is the data you are going to gather, and how are you going to gather it? So interviews or surveys or focus groups, whatever is going to work. Participatory methodologies are great as well for these kinds of projects. So those are really the three important parts as you set it up, and we talk about that strategize piece, right? What are you going to ask? What do you want to know? What are you predicting? How are you going to gather the data? What data are you going to gather, excuse me, to be able to say that you've seen a change happen? And then to really write everything out. You go through the implementation, you document everything that you did, which is incredibly important because oftentimes it could be one small thing that you did that needs to be changed to do it again and do it better. Then you'll analyze the results, document those and analyze them and say, okay, was it successful? What did I learn? Should we do it again? Should we scale it up? Did it completely flop? Should we go back to the drawing board? And that's where you get to the reflect part. How do we know? Did it work? But then also, how did you do as a leader is really important in this process. The reflecting on my role as a leader in creating this process of change. And along the way, hopefully teaching those that you're working with to be improvers as well. And then the final step is to write it up, and that's your defense. So that design can look very different at different institutions. You can still kind of write these up in a traditional 5-chapter dissertation format. I have, at my institution, we have a different template that we use that really maps along the ideas of improvement science so that we can see students work through the improvement journey, but then also they can take those pieces of tools that they've drawn out or mapped out and show those as demonstrations of the work that they've done. A defense would potentially be, in my institution, we do an overview once they get to the point just before their SIR cycle. And then afterwards, they do a defense of the work that they've done. So it looks very different at different institutions, but probably a little more similar than to traditional research. Yes, Laura, I can share that template of what we do at Pitt, certainly. I'm looking, I see a couple of questions here. How do we strive for net gain as a change agent? I'm not sure I understand that question. And Renee also wants the template as well. If Harden C77 can explain her question to me, their question to me, I am happy to answer that.
Well, you spoke about keeping things balanced. So you won't change try to improve something, but you change somebody's apple cart. So how do you move for change and not try to disturb people norms and traditions?
See, I would argue you want to stir norms and traditions. I had a student ask me this recently in a paper. How do you do this without upsetting the boat or rocking the boat? And improvement is about rocking the boat, right? It's about changing norms because you want to get to the roots of systems and how they're generating and continuing to create those programs. So it can be create those problems. It can be political at times, most definitely, but it is focused on small enough change that it sort of is incremental in the work that you do towards that larger change. The balance measures that I mentioned really focus more on, I would say, financials and resources, because you don't want to deplete one half of the organization to fix one problem. So that's the balance piece of that. Does that make sense?
Yes. I have a better understanding of it.
Okay.
Now, because change can be, it can move people forward,
Mhm.
but people are so set in their ways that how do you change people and try to move people together? And how do you take on the barriers for people who do not want to move forward?
That is a terrific question, and I appreciate you asking it. It is one that I think works well with improvement science because of all of the hands-on tools that you have and the driver diagram that offers a visual. So if you start way back here with diagnosing the problem and you talk to everybody, bring those stakeholders in, because we talk a lot about leadership and leading change. I think we often forget that that includes bringing in people to do that work with you. So it is a shared effort in creating an understanding of that problem. So that means getting multiple perspectives, which allows for buy-in. People like to have their voices heard. They may not agree with what the problem is, but at the very least, they're telling you what their perspective is in an organization. That's important that everybody has buy-in in that their voices are heard. And that even if it's not, if it's a traditional voice versus a marginalized voice, having everyone come together and have those conversations is great, because then you see the big picture and you can diagnose really not only what the problem is, but where it is in the system. So it may be more prevalent in a certain part of the system than another part, or those parts may not know what that problem looks like in each of their systems. So getting them involved in that, getting them involved in the stakeholder analysis or mapping out the way the system works, that again gets everyone involved in the process and potentially can work towards, when you get to this part, when there's a driver diagram, then if you have these different sections of the organization, you can have different people working on different change ideas. So somebody who may be sort of a curmudgeon about wanting to change, potentially they have a smaller change idea that they work on, or they don't work on change. Give them a project that says, okay, well, what if we do nothing? Show me what happens there. Help me understand the data there. So this is a place where a lot of different change ideas can all happen at once as the whole organization moves towards that aim. And so again, bringing everybody in, having them work together, having them see their role in it, and then the big picture of where you want to go as an organization is a great leadership tool, but it's also a great improvement tool because it allows for a 360 understanding and 360 level of change, as opposed to just you as a leader and maybe a couple of people sort of pushing change.
Thank you.
Sure. So I have additional resources. I'm sort of at the end of what I wanted to share with you all. There's a lot of other resources that are out there. I particularly recommend my good colleague, Brandy Nicole Hinnon Crawford's book, The Improvement Science Education Primer. It is a nice book paired with our book because it goes through those tools a little deeper than we do in our book, but she also has a really nice equity and justice lens where she argues for improvement science as a means to address issues around equity, justice, and inclusion. And so it's a great book to go with it. The Educational Leaders Guide is more of chapters that have different pieces of improvement in there. And then there's some sections that have been written by practitioners as well, which is really nice case studies. The two books on the bottom are the ones that have come out of the Carnegie Foundation. The first one, Learning to Improve, really looks at the theoretical underpinnings of improvement science by looking at the principles of improvement. And that's a great book. Improvement in Action, I've not had a chance to read that one yet, but I know that it is a much more around case studies of what it looks like using improvement science to change schools. And then the Improvement Science Handbook up here on the right, this one you can find for free online. It's what the New York City School Department of Education uses with their teachers to teach improvement. And it is a great little 20-something page booklet that's all digital that walks you through improvement science very quickly, but in a very user-friendly language. So I often use the tools in there or the pages in there to give to my students, or sometimes to other practitioners that I work with so they can get their heads around improvement science. It's a small field of improvement science and education. So these are really the main books that are out there. There are some articles and things that are written, but there has not been a ton of work that's been done in education. And there has not been a lot of dissertations yet that have been produced. My institution has our first full cohort going through using improvement science this year. I know Western Carolina, where Dr. Crawford is at, they've had a couple of rounds of students go through, cohorts go through. But I would argue that both of us are still kind of trying to improve it as well. We're both learning the process as well. As I'm going through right now, I'm teaching on Saturday, and I have a ton of things I already want to change about how I've taught my students, because I'm seeing how they're reacting and learning from it. So unfortunately, there's not a heap of examples out there just yet, but they are slowly coming. And, you know, of course, you all who are here will hopefully be part of that resource as we go forward. What kinds of questions can I answer for everybody? So there's a few, Laura, when you say there's a few of you at South Florida that want to use improvement science, are you also considering doing a group dissertation, or you individuals want to do individual dissertations?
Right now, individuals, although we are talking with our faculty and coordinators to see if it would be possible, maybe not for us necessarily, but for the next cohorts to be able to use, or do, I should say, group dissertations. But for now, it would be individual projects.
You just reminded me of another resource, because you all just got one of my best colleagues from the University of Pittsburgh, Dr. Dana Thompson Dorsey, is now at South Florida. And she worked with the Gates Foundation to create a set of tools around framing improvement science through an equity and justice lens. So there's a bunch of tools that can lay, excuse me, that can lay on top of improvement science that will help you do the work from an equity and justice lens as well. So you might reach out to her and ask her for the link to that database and those resources. What other kinds of questions do we have? Improvement science will work really well with group dissertations, particularly if you're in a group from like a same district or same organization. We've seen a couple of them come out of not using exactly improvement science, but design-based research out of Michigan State, which has been interesting. And again, this is all meant to, it really is a tool that's meant to be done with groups of people. So as a group dissertation, it would be phenomenal.
I wanted to ask, because one of the things that I wanted, which you're going to provide, is a template, because we weren't sure how it looked to create a dissertation product that was using improvement science. So that'll help a lot. My other question, and this one's more very much mine, would be so our program especially has a really great focus on that reflection piece. So that really caught my eye with the CR. I can't say it.
I know.
Cycle.
SIR.
So I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more on how is it different, that reflection piece, from the PDSA, which is what we're more used to, and how as we as EdD students can incorporate that in our, in our dissertation projects.
Sure. So with the PDSA cycle, it's plan, do, study, act. So you plan it out, you do it, you study what happened, and then by action, it means, okay, what are our next steps? Like, that worked, it didn't work, let's try it again. Reflect we wanted to go a little bit deeper, where we wanted you to reflect on the impact of the change in terms of the organization, in terms of the people involved, and in terms of yourself as a leader. Because as I said, we see these programs graduating scholarly practitioners who are leaders in the field. And so how does this work as a leadership tool for you? How does it help you think about the people that you're working with in your organization? How did you incorporate an equity and justice lens into that work? and what was the result of what happened. So it's a little more of a reflective process than just saying, okay, this is what we learned from the data, this is where we need to go. It's stepping back and thinking about it in terms of the people and the people involved, including yourself, and the processes that were involved to get there and what the impacts of those were. Does that help? Great.
Yeah, because it's more looking at the bigger picture and how it incorporates into the change we want to see in our organizations. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. What other questions do we have? We have plenty of time, so I want to make sure I open this up to you all so that we hear from the kinds of things that are stumping you or successes that you've had with improvement science. Anything anybody want to share that's worked well?
Dr. Perry, I got a quick question. And
Sure.
we're dealing with the review of knowledge for action, kind of like how either Harvard put it or where you're using, I lost it, the review of scholarly and professional knowledge.
Mhm.
How have you seen others who are they're more of the traditional PhD faculty, how they've received that aspect of looking at literature from that standpoint? It's not meant to be a loaded question.
I know. One has to think carefully on how one answers these sorts of questions, although I do know a couple of my faculty colleagues are on this call, so I can call on them to help me out here. I think with these programs, I don't know how big the one at USF is, but my program has 60 to 70 students per cohort across 8 concentration areas. So my entire School of Education faculty are involved in this program, and we see anywhere from 3 to 5 of our students going through the dissertation process at the same time. And in fact, the way our program is, our dissertation is spread out across the entire 3 years of the program. So they start writing their problem of practice in year 1. They work on the literature piece of informing that problem in the first summer. Then they move into the design of it over the next year. And then they actually implement the SAA, we call it a PDSA, but the PDSA cycle in that final year. So they're all ready to go into that 3rd year in the research part of it. So we have to, as faculty, work with our students on the literature piece in that first summer. They take a course that helps them write it. But we have found, because A, writing is not a specialty of most EdD students, and B, the literature can be so overwhelming if one has to go about writing a traditional literature review, that our faculty gets so frustrated at having to read those and correct the writing and reteach it, even though they've had a course, because it's just not a second nature, that we've really pushed this idea. My colleagues and I are doing a study right now. We're doing our own improvement cycle, really, to understand what are the benefits of traditional literature reviews on this process. And we've already concluded from working with, doing sort of our defining of the problem and our stakeholder understanding, nobody wants to do it. The faculty don't want to read it. The students don't want to do it. And the students will never do this again. They will never write a literature review, a traditional literature review. So we're pushing the idea that literature is a tool. And so that's the way we've described it, is a tool for understanding. And we've grounded that understanding in some research that I've done with a WT grant that I have on how do practitioners use research evidence in practice. And that is a huge topic in the WT Grant Foundation. That's one of their major areas, is how do we get practitioners to use research knowledge? And so this is one of the arguments we have, is that if we want and expect practitioners to take the writing that we do as academics and the knowledge that we have and use it in practice, then we cannot force them to write a 50-page literature review. They have to think of literature as a different kind of tool that they will go to after they've graduated. They'll look up studies, they'll read abstracts, they'll skim research studies and say, okay, what do I need to know? It has to be something that can be more usable. So I always start with, this is a horrible thing to do, but I always start with the Harvard example, because people tend to listen when Harvard does something, right? So this idea that they're using it as a tool for understanding a problem. So hopefully that'll help. And I just was down visiting your faculty last year and gave them a whole talking to about this. So if they need me to come back, I will.
I heard from actually my chair loved the fact that you were down, and she was actually going to try to be on tonight.
Nice.
But it looks like she wasn't able to make it. But that's why, I mean, she's embracing my whole new approach of going down this route of improvement science and doing an alternative dissertation method. So we're fortunate. But I know, from the student aspect, I think Loris and Carrie's putting in the chat, we would love for you to come down.
I'd love to come back. I'm also good friends with Dr. Burns as well, one of your faculty members. Any other big questions? Anything anyone stumped with?
I want to put one of my friends on the spot, one of my friends from the cohort, because I've heard a concern from her, which I think was answered through this presentation, but she's afraid that the approach might not be rigorous enough in the eyes of, maybe other faculty and traditional PhD students. So again, I think it was answered through the presentation when you were saying that it is based on science and we're going to use it, I can't pronounce this word, but anyways, if you could talk to her and make her see that it is rigorous and that the work that we're doing is valuable, it's just a little bit different.
I know my colleague who's on this call, Christina Heswell, is shaking her head with me because we get this a lot. Improvement science it probably shouldn't have the word science in there because there's something about that throws people, but it's no different than any other approach like case study. If your faculty will let you do case study or evaluation or ethnography or phenomenology, it's no different than those because it is not, it's an umbrella, it's an approach, and it gives you a process, but you still have to use data gathering tools. You still have to gather data. And that data could be just as much as you'd gather in a traditional dissertation, depending on what it is you need to know, what your inquiry questions are. So you still design a study, and that study is the SCIAR PDSA cycle, but all of this background has to go into it for you to be able to diagnose the problem first, which is the same as what a PhD student does when they go into the literature and they look for a gap in the literature, only you look for knowledge from that literature to help frame that problem that you're going to go investigate. It's very similar to action research, and many institutions don't have any problem with action research. Action research, the difference is that it focuses more on individual practice. It comes out of working with teachers or small groups of people, whereas improvement science looks at changing systems. It's also similar to design-based research, which focuses on using research to create principles of design for how to move things forward. But all of it uses the same tools of research. One of the things that does throw faculty is the idea that improvement science is typically meant to be done in 90-day cycles. So you can learn quickly whether or not something is working or not. And in traditional research, randomized clinical trials that go on for years has always been the norm. So this idea that we could learn in 90 days if something's working or not is important in practice because you don't have the time to wait 2 years to see if something got fixed before you realize you've damaged a whole bunch of students and human beings. So thinking smaller and saying, okay, I tried it out. This isn't going anywhere. We got to go back to the drawing board and start over. Or this is great. Maybe we need to scale it up. Ideally, you'll do several different cycles, and it would be with several different changes as you head towards that aim. But unfortunately, most of these programs are not unfortunately. Fortunately, most of these programs are only 2 to 3 or 3 to 4 years. But unfortunately, that doesn't make it possible to do multiple cycles. But like I said, looking at this, you're meant to go do this continuously after you graduate. What if you didn't start the dissertation process with improvement science at the start? How would you suggest you pivot midpoint? Ooh, good question, Kari. I need to know a little bit more about what you're doing, but and where you are in the program, but I would say as long as you have a problem of practice, there's always an opportunity to address it through a change idea or some kind of intervention. And moving towards that, you just need to have a good understanding of what the problem is.
I had a couple questions about the literature review for the EdD versus the PhD. I'm just curious, like, how is the content different? I know you stated that the EDD was looking at knowledge while the PhD was looking at gaps, but in a way you're getting knowledge from the literature either way, and you have to identify a problem for the EDD. So wouldn't that be a gap?
Well, a gap is really where you're thinking about who hasn't researched something and where might your research fit in there. Whereas with the EDD, you want to be looking at what's already been done to help you understand that problem more deeply and potential solutions that have been done. So you can ground your solution in, okay, this has been tried and it's worked well, we want to try it. So it's more informing your understanding as opposed to finding places where you'll contribute what you have done with your work. Because the idea is what you're doing is you're changing your local context. You're not writing to go produce scholarly literature and articles and things like that. You can certainly do that, but the goal is to focus on changing your practice. It's also focused on not making you an expert on the content that you're studying or the problem that you're studying. Whereas a PhD, you become an expert in, I'm trying to think of what I became an expert in with my PhD. I was supposed to be an expert in international education policy based on the work that I did. So my work would contribute to that knowledge and continue to grow there. Whereas you're becoming experts on applying research to practice to change it. So it's not really about the problem, because this problem is one out of 1,000 that you'll encounter in practice and in life. We want you to know how to use literature, how to use any kind of research, whether it's improvement science or not, and how to apply that to create change as part of your leadership agenda.
I see.
So it's different in that way.
Yeah. The applying the knowledge versus being knowledgeable on a larger scale is, it to me, that's what it sounds like the difference is.
Yeah. And that's not to say that you're not going to create knowledge. Really the big picture for me is that thousands of you practitioners are out there using improvement science, creating knowledge on the ground in your local context. And then we network you in ways that you are informing problems on a bigger scale from the ground up, a very grassroots effort, as opposed to knowledge that comes from the academy or the Department of Education, or all these places that sort of come down and say, do it this way, without really knowing what's happening in practice. This gives you that power to learn on the ground, create change, and create that change grounded in evidence so that you can then say, oh, no, that's not going to work for us. This is why. Let me tell you what we know about our organization and how change works and how this works. It gives you that power of using research design to be able to debate and decipher and create change. So you're building your own knowledge base that will ultimately work towards creating a professional knowledge base in your field if everyone's doing it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Can you tell I'm you guys' biggest champion? Like, I have dedicated the last 14 years of my life making sure EdD students come out ready to tackle the problems in practice. And when improvement science came along, I naturally saw the connection there. And what I didn't realize right away is how hard it would be for faculty to get their heads around because of language like driver diagrams and fishbone diagramming and things like that. It does very much come from the world of business and now the world of healthcare. And it's not language that we're used to as academics, but it really isn't different. It's just a process or an approach that uses the same methodological tools as any other approach uses. So interviews, focus groups, surveys, statistical gathering, anything you do with any other traditional dissertation. But the difference is that the goal or the outcome of this product is some kind of change. It's not, well, this is what I found and it's great, and now I recommend further research be done. It's, this is what happened and I can see major change and it needs to keep going, and that's what I'm going to do after I graduate. If I could, I'd like to put my colleague, Christina Hespel, Dr. Hespel from the University of Denver, on the spot if she's still here, and see if she wants to provide any thoughts on improvement science dissertations. I know she's been sharing a few.
Thank you, Dr. Perry. It's so nice to be here this afternoon, and I'm driving, so
Oh, I'm
it's kind of
sorry.
interesting. I'm just thrilled to listen to the presentation. I got to watch part of it, and two of my students are on as well. And listening to you describe the process it just makes so much sense. I highly, highly recommend the book to which Dr. Perry is referring. And having been a practitioner before I became an academic, the whole process, the EdD process, and now the EdD with improvement science methodologically is something that is going to change, not just change, it's going to improve practice. So thank you so much for providing this fireside chat. And I would ask that the various documents that people have asked for, if you put that together and make it available as well as the slides, we will all take it back to our departments, students and faculty, and I'm sure put it to good use. So thanks so much.
Sure. Thank you. Sorry you're driving, but I appreciate that.
No. You're very welcome. Thank you for your inspiration this afternoon.
And I will make this recording available as well as my slides available to everyone. And I can send out the template that we use that kind of is a design of this. But we also have in the back of the book for your faculty, we created a potential template for the design of the document that you'd write, but then also how to map the improvement science across your program so that you're learning and practicing those tools along the way. So that's something you can share with your faculty as well. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, hi, Dr. Perry. It's Dana Roberts out of USF EdD, and I'm entering the second year. It's basically a process question, if I may. So improvement science, I understand it from what you're saying, it's basically problem practice and sort of looking at, and I love the PDSA cycle. I've been in community development, and that's kind of where, and healthcare, and that's kind of where I'm coming from with my dissertation and practice. But there's also a policy evaluation component and a policy change component. So I was wondering if you and your colleagues could comment on that when it goes sort of cross-cutting across silos and potentially even programs and policy streams. And where I'm leaning is more towards sort of implementation science. And I guess the question is, what's the difference between that sort of approach of implementation science? And Anthony Bigland talks about that. I also would think that Margaret Wheatley is kind of the implementation science person as well. Comments?
So tell me, just explain to me real quick again what you're doing with your dissertation, because you lost me when you went from healthcare to policy. So I'm not making.
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, it's social determinants of health at the local level around early childhood education and teacher quality improvement in childcare, early childhood education, which is basically a holistic, all child, whole child approach.
Okay. Okay, so you're hoping that as a result of the work that you're doing, that policy will change in an organization?
No, local, county, and statewide. So
big,
yeah,
big giant
yeah,
policy. Okay.
Big change. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that speaks to the idea of the grassroots sort of ground up, right? So improvement science is meant to start small, and they want you to, some of the great language that comes out of the Carnegie Foundation and its president is, you put a stake in the ground, do something, don't keep talking about it, don't keep planning, just put a stake in the ground and do a PDSA cycle and see what happens. Because all of this is meant to be fluid, it's meant to be constant learning. And so learning small and figuring out if it's working or not working, and then going back to the drawing board and then doing it again. As you continue to do those cycles, you build up a body of knowledge. And then that body of knowledge, whether it's just in your organization or you're able to then collaborate and network with other organizations who are doing something similar, that can scale up to the point where it can shift policy. So this is where I say you're building an evidence base from the ground up to be able to change that policy and to bring it to the policymakers at the state level to say, look, this is happening and this is the evidence we have. But oftentimes practitioners are not taught to use methodologies in ways that gather data and evidence that can debate current practice. And that's the goal of this, is to give you that kind of evidence so that you can debate the way things are done as a result of learning what works and what doesn't work quickly.
Okay. Yeah. So basically, it's R&D, so research and development, and that's why I like the PDSA. And you said strategize. Can't remember what the next one was. Implement, and then it would be
strategize, implement.
I don't have the book in front of me. Sorry.
I think I know.
And I'm on the phone, so I don't have
analyze.
Analyze. Yeah.
Analyze.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, it basically pilot studies and rapid improvement projects and gather data out of that.
Yeah, great.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Ciao.
Katie wants to know, where do other theoretical frameworks and epistemologies fit into this model? That's a really great question. In most EdD programs, I would say, and maybe most is generalizable, is too generalizing, but the idea is not to get practitioners wrapped up in the notion of epistemologies. I mean, we mentioned it briefly in our program, but it's not something that you all need to worry about, because by nature, you're probably all pragmatist because you want to create change, you want to do work and stay in practice. But the idea of theoretical frameworks is important. That's where that fits in with your literature, because there are theories that will frame the way you think about the problems as well. Critical theory, critical race theory, feminist theory, those kinds of theories can influence the way you think about the problem. So they go into that part where you're using the literature to frame your understanding of the problem. So we don't discount theories at all. Epistemologies, I know they're important, but the idea is really to develop a program that will give you language and tools that you're going to continue to use as you graduate, and chances of you ever talking about your epistemological stance again are very slim. So understanding what that is and what that means for you as a practitioner is not a bad thing, but it's not necessarily a stance that you would need to have in a dissertation in practice. I would argue that a piece of what you want to have in your dissertation in practice, whether it's improvement science or not, is your positionality. That's much more important in practice, because people need to know what your lens is as you come towards the work that you're doing. So if you're like me, a white, cisgender, middle-aged female, heterosexual female who identifies as she, her, then that's going to influence the way I go into the work that I do. But I may also talk about my background in multicultural understanding, my background in social justice and equity, and how that influences my thinking based on critical theories that I've read, things like that. So positionality is much more important in this practice-based literature. I would argue it's also important in academic literature as well, but in thinking about going into creating change, people need to know where you're coming from and what your lens is as you go about creating that change. I hope that helped. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
Dr. Perry, it's Christina again.
Okay.
How are you seeing, people are always interested in what the product of an EdD dissertation in practice can look like. What kinds of innovation are you finding as a result of improvement science being used in the way that the final DIP actually looks?
That's a great question. I wish I had a better answer though. So far, we've not seen products that look incredibly different from traditional dissertations. They are definitely shorter. I know our dissertation at Pitt should be no more than 100 pages. I've seen them as short as 80. And I've seen them at Michigan State around 90. So that seems to be about a norm. The idea is not for you to write something that's going to be 250 pages. But we've also seen other products that get attached to the dissertation in practice, which may be something that can be more usable in practice, like an executive summary for a board, a PowerPoint presentation for a professional organization, what's the word I want? Like a manual for creating a PD session for a group of people. So something that's much more usable in practice. And that speaks to that idea that I said before of a scholarly practitioner being able to disseminate their work in different ways. But physically looking different, I have yet to find an institution that will do my TED Talk idea. I think that is the epitome of what these things should be. But I haven't found anybody brave enough to do that just yet. We're hoping the University of Denver will do it.
Well, based on 2 students who are on.
Oop, we lost her. All right, I see another question here. For my dissertation practice, my goal is to capture the need for technology. Position is being cut from schools. Would my dissertation lead to improvement science? Should I speak with my major professor? Okay. So I'm Karen, I'm reading this and I want to make sure I understand. You're studying your own practice as a coach and you want to see if that would be improvement science. If you're studying your own practice, that's probably more action research because you're not focusing on a system. Action research isn't all that different except for the systems approach that's there. So you're not going to understand, you wouldn't do the whole understanding how the system functions. You would do more reading about teaching, being a technology coach and whatever other aspects of literature that you want to do to help frame your understanding of what you need to know. And then you would do a study on yourself through PDSA cycles. I did have a student do one of these several years ago before we were using improvement science with action research, where she designed, used online gaming for teaching Spanish. And so she developed that and put it through a semester of her teaching and gathered data from the students to understand how that online gaming impacted their ability to speak and use the language in class. And then she was going to go through another cycle, but that's action research. Sure. Dr. Wilkerson, do you have something to say about improvement science since you're here on the call with us as well? Working with your Clemson students?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My take on improvement science is it has the opportunity, if done effectively, to revolutionize education in our country, to really take a look at a problem and interrogate it, but try to figure out not only how to solve the problem, but how it fits in a larger system where you're not just solving a problem, but examining a system and how it fits in can be revolutionary. So I'm a big proponent, as you can see by being here with my friend Jill Perry. So go improvement science.
All right. So Clemson's another institution that has improvement science as one of their signature methodologies. We have a handful of institutions that it is their only methodology, and then others that it is an option that students can do. So there are more students to do it. Ultimately, my goal is to network you all so we can have group dissertations across institutions that look at the same problem in different contexts, and then pull all that knowledge together and see how we can change policy. I tried to do that once in North Carolina across 3 different universities, and that were rural, suburban, and urban. And if we'd gotten students to do that in groups across those sectors, to be able to take that knowledge and bring it to the state would be fantastic. But I haven't been able to do it since and actually make it happen. But yeah, it would be terrific.
Hi, Jill. This is Renee from USF.
Hi.
So thinking about what you're saying about IS and listening to the other faculty members talking about it, there's a couple of us actively at University of South Florida in the cohort 19 EdD program that are conducting program evaluations. And what struck me while you were answering Karen, who's a colleague of mine at USF, I'm conducting improvement science actively right now with conducting a program evaluation, not on my own problem of practice, but on a program evaluation. I'm studying university industry partnerships. Okay. So I've chosen to study a university industry partnership within the UGS unit at USF, which I am not an employee of. So I'm conducting improvement science, and I bring that up to you because me and my colleagues are trying to figure out how do we go into the alternative dissertation style, because program evaluation is similar to a traditional 5-chapter dissertation, but it's not. So how do we go about approaching our faculty for an alternative method? Does my question make sense? Looking at wanting to do presenting a program evaluation as an alternative format. I'm a professional by trade in the automotive industry, so I'm used to program evaluations, program proposals, executive summaries like you talked about, and those fit more of what I'm doing and conducting as research methodology versus writing a traditional 5-chapter evaluation. So what you're saying to me speaks to me, and I'm just trying to figure out how do I approach my committee about presenting that idea.
Couple of thoughts. So program evaluation is different than improvement science in that the component of improvement science that resonates with program evaluation is that analyze piece, where you look at something after the fact. So program evaluation looks sort of backwards. Something already happened and you're gathering data to understand if it really worked, but you didn't create the intervention. And improvement science is the intervention, you created it, and then you analyze it. So that's a little bit of a distinction there. But I can tell you that program evaluation, out of all of our CPED institutions, the 3 most popular methodologies are improvement science, action research, and program evaluation. And so we do see that quite a bit. Both, and I think the institution that originally started program evaluation as a group effort was Vanderbilt Peabody College. And they do, in their executive EdD program, they have teams that go out and do evaluations in organizations, school districts usually, and they have to create a final product that comes up. I don't know what that looks like, and I don't have access to one, but you might reach out to Vanderbilt to see if you could get an example of that. I do know that Virginia Commonwealth, that is a member of CPED, they followed that model and they've created it evaluation as well. They actually have it so that the product that is turned in is actually owned by the organization that hired in quotes, I should say, brought in the evaluation team from Virginia Commonwealth, and the students don't actually own the product. So we had one of their dissertations won an award several years ago. We had to get permission of the organization to get a copy of that to be able to evaluate it. So it didn't get published in the same way that traditional dissertations do. It didn't go to ProQuest or any of that because it was a product that was presented to their faculty for graduation, but then was given to the organization. So I imagine it looked very different. I might be able to find that one as an example, and I can certainly reach out. I think I have a description of Virginia Commonwealth. So if you send me a quick email, I will send you that so you can see that as an example. There was something else you said. Oh, and with your faculty, in terms of alternate dissertations like Dr. Hespel asked about, it's oftentimes the graduates, it's oftentimes the faculty that are the barrier because they're not used to looking at something different. And they'll blame it on the graduate school and they'll blame it on ProQuest, where all of our dissertations get published. ProQuest is now a good friend of CPED's, and they don't care what dissertations look like. They have plenty of dissertations that have attachments to them that are media files. They have published Nick Susanis's graphic novel dissertation. There's all kinds of different models that are out there across all different fields. It just depends on what your graduate school is willing to do. So a lot of times that takes faculty convincing and graduate school convincing, but there are models out there that can be different. So in talking to your faculty, what you might want to offer is, first, can we do something that looks different? And we'll see if we can get you some examples. But then also, what if you did something that was a little more traditional for them, but then you created a separate piece that was something that could be more usable in practice to this organization that you're going back to. And I've seen that happen where they want two separate pieces as a means to satisfy practice and academia. But we're still fighting that battle.
Yeah, it definitely seems like a battle because we're, you know, we were offered alternative methods, but of course now we're getting into the point where we're starting to write our first 3 chapters, and they've reverted back to a traditional method. And where I'm sitting right now, I'm sitting at an alternative method of a program evaluation. I'm actively working within a program evaluation certificate program to enhance my EdD. You know, and it fits and flows so much better with the type of research that I'm conducting. And it just makes sense, you know, so just trying to figure out how to make it where maybe not even for my cohort, but the cohorts following, where there are alternative methods that will be available for them. Because I think we're all attracted to an EdD for a reason. We're professionals that have been out working for a time, you know, and we're stepping back in, like you said, and literature might be hard to write. So we're not that normal student that's followed that traditional pathway. We've gone an alternative route, and we're back as post-traditional students wanting to achieve this doctorate for, you know, whatever reason that's brought us here.
Well, and you know, you all can have access to our website and you can look at the different models, you know, what's been produced in terms of our different institutions, and share that with your faculty, although your faculty should be looking and doing that too. Or, you know, you can ask them to reach out to me or my staff, and we can certainly send materials as well. I can send this recording out to them as well, if that will be helpful. A lot of times they just need to see what the options are and understand it, because they're so used to what they've done and what they've been doing that it's hard to think outside the box.
I think it does become very challenging. And I think when there's not a precedent set into place and it's change, right? And change is hard to do over time, but I believe they're open to it. I think they're very open to alternatives. I think that they need to see a format and possibly the rubric. Me and my colleagues have been talking about helping to you know, create that rubric. We attended the program, you know, earlier this year and saw the program evaluation with CPED. So that was very exciting for us. We attended that dissertation workshop. So we have some of that information that we've been able to provide. So I think that's very helpful. And I think that we will see evolution happen. It's things like what you've done for our EdD. I know this kind of came about over the Christmas break because we were all super excited about the book and wanting to read it. And then you being so gracious to do this for us tonight has been super exciting. So I think there's a lot of excitement with our EdD and the other folks that are on this call tonight, you know, and wanting to implement change, just trying to figure out the best pathway to do that.
Sure. Well, reach out if there's anything else I can do to help. I know we're getting close to time, and I see 2 questions on here I want to answer. Rosalind wanted to know, can I describe how improvement science distinguishes itself from educational evaluation and assessment, particularly quasi-evaluation studies? And then there was also a question on, could you use it if you were developing a new program or a system? In terms of evaluation and quasi-evaluation, again, both of those sort of look backwards at something that's already happened. Improvement science starts with this idea of deeply understanding a problem that is in a system, then doing some kind of intervention or change and understanding how that impacted the system. So there is a piece of evaluation in improvement science, but it's a completely different process. It is meant to address a standing problem within a system through a change. In terms of developing a new program or a new system, you could potentially use it. It depends on if those are a solution to something that already exists. You could definitely use a PDSA cycle in anything that you want to do, just that piece of it, that try something out, test it, gather data, analyze it, go back to the drawing board. That cycle will work in any form of developing anything. But the entire improvement process has a goal of changing systems and problems that are deeply grained in systems. And generally, the problems that have been around for a really long time, right? Although I've seen people use improvement science in their families too to try and figure out like who's going to do the dishes and things like that. It can work on a very small scale like that as well. But that said, you can start with creating something, a new program, and gathering data on it, and then learning a little bit about that and what's not working or working, and then start an improvement process from there, which is what happened at my institution around the literature review. We designed the EdD program 5 years ago. 5 years into it, it was a brand new program. We're seeing that this literature review is really the part that is just people are banging their heads against the wall. So we said, all right, let's step in here with improvement science and think about what we can do differently. And so we gathered, we had 5 years worth of data to kind of look back and say, oh yeah, this is really a problem. So you kind of have to get off the ground before you can start searching for problems. All right, it is time, and I want to make sure, be mindful of everyone's evenings, because I'm sure if you're anything like me, you stared at your screen all day today, and I want you to have some time to be able to get away from the screen. I thank you all for being here with me tonight. I will make sure that we email this out to all of you probably by Monday, because it's going to take some time for me to gather the things that I said would go with it. So appreciative, not just that you're here with us, but that you are doing this work. We are grateful for you, and you are the reason that we are doing this work. So reach out to me if you have any questions. I will throw my email address in the chat. And I'm happy to continue talking and help you all in whichever way you need. Thanks so much, and I hope you enjoyed the book. Have a great night, everybody.
Hi, Dr. Perry. This is Nancy Aguilar. I'm a third-year EdD doctoral student at California State University, Los Angeles.